It's exactly 14 minutes past 1 on a Tuesday afternoon. You are welcome, one and all, to the Executive Lounge. My name is Inshira Ado, and this is the Thought Leadership show that brings you all the insights from the lives of men and women who have scaled the daunting heights of growing businesses or managing institutions right here at home and around the world. So, we just try to bring you the best of minds every Tuesday on the Executive Lounge. I just would like to say, I'm breaking protocol. I normally don't do this, but I think this lady deserves this. Karen Dodu of the Joy Business team, it's your birthday today. We're thankful to God that now you can actually vote. You're now fully of age, and we pray for God's guidance and grace. And may everything be doubled, your joy, your peace, and fulfillment from the work you do. God bless you. So, what do I have for you today? Or who do I have for you today? One of our own. Don't even know if people can become former journalists, but yeah. So we'll soon be learning about this guest of mine, who is currently the executive director of the organization known as Pen Plus Bytes. And we'll learn about what Pen Plus Byte is all about. But here's the thing. News has evolved over the years. There was once upon a time we only had newspapers, and then came radio and television, where we started relying on radio. And I remember as a child, I used to see grown men huddling around little tiny boxes listening to news, and you'd hear some funny interruptions in there, but they're listening to something from very far away. I remember when there was a boxing match or something, and when people didn't have television, they would tune in and listen to the commentary, which was coming to them from very far away. Today, we all have devices in our hands that are capable of either tracking the news or even being the tool for the broadcast of news. So what is the future of news? That's something we're going to be learning about today with my guest, who is Juliet Amoah. She is the executive director at Pen Plus Byte, which is a civil society organization at the forefront of using digital technology or using tech and digital tools to resolve civil challenges. Before joining Pen Plus Byte, Juliet was deputy director and head of programs for the British Council here in Ghana. And then recently she had returned from Kenya, where she was a business transformation consultant for the Professional Development Unit at the British Council in Sub-Saharan Africa. And she's a trained journalist. She has a postgraduate degree in new media and democracy, governance and leadership, as well as in social policy studies. Interests are in tech for development, design, people, and places. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Juliet Amoah, you're welcome to the Executive Lounge.
Thank you very much, Inshira.
Nice to catch up with you.
I know. It's
busy woman.
No.
I know. Anyway, let's jump into this. From your own experiences as a journalist, you started writing for the Ghana Review International, some 28 years or so ago?
Yeah. No,
quite a while back.
Yeah. Wouldn't say 28, but yes.
But in the 20s, at least 2 decades ago. About 24, thereabout. But you're still quite young. The thing about the media today, I mean, we relied on this monthly magazine to tell us stories about the arts, about democracy, development, how well Ghanaians are doing across the world. But today, we can tell stories about people almost instantly. Looking back now, do you think that at the time we envisaged that the news media would become what it is today? And if we did, have we harnessed the potential opportunities that evolution presented us then?
Oh, thank you very much, Inshira. It's an interesting question about if any of us within the practice of journalism back in the time that I was a journalist or a practicing journalist had seen this future, this great future and great potential for news. I'd say that it wasn't as clear. Obviously, mobile and mobile technology was just an emerging concept or an emerging tool back in the early 90s. Yes, it would have been more established in other markets, but in our market it was just it had just started with Mobitel and all those other greats, Dizengoff with its Motorola flip phone and that sort of thing. And so I would say that we didn't quite envisage what it would grow to be like, given what social media in the last maybe decade or 5 years in Ghana has been able to do and explode and exponentially turn the media landscape into one that has many moving parts, many co-creators, many different people who are curating what we are consuming as people, as news. I don't think that any of us saw it coming. Now, your other question was about harnessing it. I think that when we did start to see the possibilities, certainly news outlets such as the Multimedia Group and a few others at the time, Sunny FM and all those or Vibe, for example, did start to find ways to harness what social media and the possibilities that it offered. They did start to harness it. But did they do it in a systematic way? Did they do it with the kind of empathy and understanding what the audience needed and how the audience was appreciating news or consuming news? I don't think that any of us quite nailed it in that way.
That's a very, very profound statement, that we probably didn't do it well with the, emphasis on empathy and making it the audience-centric, as we ought to. We don't consume what we produce. We program for the audience. Do you find that these things are more cliche or in practice there's a move or a shift towards putting the audience at the center, that we're feeding them what we think they want, or we're actually understanding what they want and giving that to them?
Well, to do that kind of understanding of that kind of analysis, it would require that most newsrooms have an R&D department or an innovations department.
Are you kidding?
That actually looks at, spearheading and getting ahead of the consumer themselves. And if you look at it, that's the sort of thing that geniuses like Steve Jobs did in terms of putting an apple in our hands. Because at the time, consumers didn't even know that they needed that kind of tech. And that's what we as news producers, as news media mongers should be doing, getting ahead of the consumer, understanding, first of all, where it is and how they want to consume news, how they're interacting with what they're learning or hearing, which parts of those news articles are more meaningful than others, and then engineering news that meets them, that helps them develop, helps them become better people. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about.
Wow. It's 23 minutes past 1. This is the Executive Lounge with me in Shirado. My guest is Juliet Amoah. She is the Executive Director at Pen Plus Bytes. They're a civil society organization that uses technology and digital tools to find solutions to civic challenges. One of the reasons we're having this conversation is really because there's quite a lot of talk about how newsrooms will change in the future. The technology disruption or the technological disruption around the world already exists. I mean, there are news bots already where some of the news feeds that you're reading are not being curated by human beings. They're using complex algorithms and artificial intelligence to get this done. Where does that leave the art of storytelling? The feeling that a journalist would have in telling a certain story, all those nuances. Where will all this disruption leave that?
I think the simple or short answer to that, Inshira, would be that journalists have to morph. They have to change from being producers of news to become aggregators of relevant content. And so the bots and the AI that you're talking about are algorithms that are looking at how people, which search engines they're going on, which stories they click on, and they're looking at all those parameters and saying, okay, let's feed this person who we've kind of targeted, who we've studied over a period, and we know what interests them. Let's feed them this. What I'm saying is that journalists, to become relevant and not be left behind and pushed aside from that storytelling cycle, will have to be people who still understand emotions. So I'm going back to that word about empathy. AI, luckily for us, I don't know about 10 years from now,
but at the moment, can't feel.
They can't feel at the moment. They can't feel. So we've still got an edge over them. We're still able to say, look, let me curate the news so that what's happening in Sudan, how they're, doing activism and protesting and pushing the government to take certain steps. As a human being, I know how they feel. I need to find the stories that bring out that feeling, that something that's tangible. The robots and AI are going to aggregate stories and feed it to people with just bare facts. We have to make it our role and our duty to tell the behind the scenes with the level of feeling and depth of feeling that the robots can't.
Okay,
and that's
otherwise
the only way.
we lose out. So another important thing about the news today, and thanks to Mr. Trump, the word or the phrase fake news has become a buzzword. But in recent times, if you're following quite a lot of stories and incidents across the continent, sub-region, or even right here at home, you'll observe that social media is awash with stories that constantly receive rebuttals that say, this is fake, this is not from us, this is not from me. And this is because we're now straddling the line where we're not just consumers of news, but we're also producers. So there's this new terminology that, there's the age of presumption. And so there's so much fluidity. How will the future, where everybody can become a news producer, be guarded against some unscrupulous elements who would want to throw out stories and news that could disturb social cohesion?
It's a big conversation at the moment. It's got to do also with the wider media and information literacy landscape and the media economy as a whole. Because we haven't stepped up as journalists and media persons, obviously we've created a vacuum, and vacuums are not universally something that someone or something
has to fill it.
It's always got to fill it. And that's where social media has filled the gap for people. Now that they've got this powerful tool some people are, or not just some people, communities are beginning to recognize more and more that this tool that we have, and I'm not naming names, but the big guys, your search engine owners and all the big guys who've created these social media platforms are beginning to try to claw back some kind of control. I think that what is important now is to get us, when I say us, it's the consumer, to understand that, look, yes, there is a possibility for you to co-create content, but you also have a responsibility to make sure that the content that you're either consuming or creating is, in fact, based on factual elements rather than on hearsay or whatever. So there's fact checking and whatnot, but there's also the aspect of looking at ethics and ethical sharing of information, and that's got to come down back to us journalists. And with time, hopefully, we will be able to use different methods to claw back some level of control.
Fantastic stuff. It's 29 minutes past 1. And you can join the conversation. You can send your thoughts to us by WhatsApp or Telegram. The telephone number for that, the WhatsApp line is 0244 340 437, or you can tweet at Joy997FM and just ask your questions or make your contribution to this conversation. We're looking at how the news has evolved over the years. We all remember when it all started with just print. Then we had shortwave radio, we had some television. Today we have FM, or even to a large extent you have digital satellite news broadcasting across the globe, so you can learn about things happening around the world from the device in your hand. That same device is able to produce the news. So you are no longer just a consumer, you are now a prosumer. You're producing and consuming at the same time. But that creates a gray area in the world now where there's so much news. How do we filter? How do we filter what's factual from what is not? And how do we ensure that the multiplicity of sources of news allows us to maintain social cohesion and drive human development forward? And my guest, Juliet Amwa, Executive Director at Pen Plus Byte, has said that it's important for us to build our capacity in information literacy, right? And that we should be able to fact check certain things, and we should not necessarily we shouldn't be taking things at face value. And that, remember that you have a certain responsibility, because if you're taking on the information and it's going to inform a certain posture or an action, you might as well make sure that you're getting right.
That's correct.
Wonderful. And as I said, you can join us with your own thoughts. I know quite a number of you are watching us live on Facebook. Share the link with your friends and let them join this conversation. It matters to you as much as it matters to us over here. So, social cohesion is a very important thing. So important that recently I was reading the UNDP had sponsored some research to be done in Ghana, and I was amazed at the number of conflict-prone locations across the country. Couple that with social media. Practically, what should we be doing as Ghanaians? Things make the rounds on social media very quickly. From peer-to-peer chat platforms to group chat platforms, news makes the round. Sometimes it's credible, sometimes it's not. And again, as citizens and individuals, how are we able to... Can social media replace traditional media? Because the traditional media house will have certain protocols, right? And it's a building like we're in, and someone's going to have to say, yes, publish this, don't publish that. There's a certain process, but you don't have that editorial process for when someone sends a message to a chat platform and then in 10 minutes it's gone viral.
Wow. I mean, can we be replaced? Traditional media? I don't think we can be replaced. I think there's still a space for traditional media and traditional journalism. But what is happening is that we now have more contenders for the title of news producer, just as you were saying. And so I'll go back to what I was saying earlier on about media information literacy being one of the key ways in which we can keep this together. And what really is media information literacy, and what does it stand for in terms of I think that the purpose of media information literacy is just to make sure that people are literate enough to engage in a digital society. And what it means is that we're cultivating or building the capacity of individuals in the world, in and around our communities, to be able to understand, inquire, create, and communicate using critical thinking. Using critical thinking to produce news. And so the idea of it is that if we can get this critical mass of people who are engaging with the news in the way that I've described, in a new media information literacy atmosphere, then it will help in creating a group of people who are not just irresponsibly spreading information or disinformation, as you would like to, as you could call it, rather than fake news, you could call it disinformation. Then they will understand that, look, we all have a responsibility to keep it together, as you say, keep our communities safe, keep our communities more cohesive and less divisive.
You know, you did spend some time in Nairobi, working, at the British Council, but I'm sure you would have experienced the use of social media to rally citizens activism and what's the other word? They come together to get things done. So the engagement, the Kenya Red Cross, they're constantly sending updates. Whenever there's an incident on any of their roads or anything, the Red Cross is sending messages. They're asking for people to provide blood or go to blood centers. There are all kinds of things that they're using social media to do today to drive development. Wherein lies the opportunity for a country like Ghana?
I mean, social media is a great tool, and we've spent the last 5 minutes talking about the kind of innate possibilities that it provides for both good and bad. And so in terms of social media being a civic mobilizer or a tool for mobilizing societies and communities to act or to action, I think that it's a great opportunity. We haven't we haven't used it as much as certainly Kenya. We saw the Arab Spring and what they could do with it. It's happening in Sudan as we talk. But I think that ultimately for the greater good, the tool of social media is a great one. But the question is, how do you curate the messages? How do you put messages on these platforms that get people to do positive activism versus more disruptive activism? And that's always, if you interviewed the people who started the Arab Spring in Tunisia, in Egypt, they will tell you that it's the most difficult thing during their campaigns, getting people to stay on the straight and narrow. Once you open that Pandora's box,
anything is possible.
Sometimes anything is possible, because you may have one set of messages calling people to a certain action, But since we're not bots and we're humans, there may be people who take the messages, cull out different, aspects of that message and go off in a different tangent. I'm not sure that any of us have the answers for how does one actually make sure that those societies that we create for the purposes of moving along certain actions stay with the message and actually stay on the straight and narrow. It's a broad thing, and that's why I keep going back to, first of all, making sure that we've created a more responsible community. We've created a more responsible civil or civic society, and that will only come from engagements, will come from discussions such as the one we're having, and maybe peer-reviewed ways of doing things.
Let's take a trip to the macrosphere, if I could call it that, and look at, nation states are beginning to deploy social media in ways that they galvanize citizens, reinforce their national cultural orientation, all of that, so that they can get them to push behind the vision. I don't know if we are doing one. Forgive me if we are, but I don't think we are. So in this my utopia, where I always take my guests to, I have given you a white canvas to plot the points and the trajectory we should be taking to use tech and digital tools to get better citizen engagement and participation. What would you do?
What would I do? I think that government is what we're talking about at the moment. Government loves our civic participation when it comes to us paying taxes, and contributing, volunteering to do things on the streets and that sort of thing. But when it comes to developing our capacity to do it, sometimes they're lacking. What would we do, or what should we do? I think that governments should, first of all, create platforms for innovation and engagement. That's the first thing. We have to have a strategy, yes, and that strategy should include an innovations platform for citizens to be able to engage. This is led by government, and it gives citizens a sense of purpose, more purpose, if it's you're able to air things as you go along throughout the year or years, rather than you're only moved to action and then you find your own outlet.
Right.
So it's important that it's government-led. A platform where I can send an email, I can send a tweet, I can send my ideas about what's going on that I would like to see change. So it's an outlet. The second thing is, and the word empower is a broad word, but I think that governments and their agencies should look at empowering citizens, and those empowering things may differ from community to community, and we also then will have to disaggregate what we mean by empowerment for young people versus older people, because older people get to speak their minds anyways, whether to government, whether to power, whether to younger people. So we need to disaggregate what do we mean by empowerment by the different social groups. We also need to provide incentives, I think, for like a stick and carrot approach to the social media. So for groups that use media and use it for activism positively, you can probably give them an incentive and say, look, wholeheartedly, we're taking all your recommendations because you've done it through these laid down procedures of getting to a solution, rather than groups who have gone rogue, if you like, and used activism or social media to gather together people who are off on a different tangent. So we can use provide incentives. And I think that it's also important that we've got government agencies such as the Ministry of Information, the Ministry of Communications, and the question is, what are their social media strategies? Because it's the social media age, it's the digital age. Surely they have to have some laid down procedures or space for effective engagement, so that will lead to effective participation in this digital society in which we live. So that's what
it's interesting, that very last point you just raised, government agency strategy or ministry strategy to reach people. If I'm not mistaken, there was a report about a certain level of apathy amongst young people in the recent South African election. If the young people and the millennials, as they're called these days, are using technology and the digital tools available, and we also admit they're the future, why do you feel that there still hasn't been the work to bring them closer to the center in terms of even trying to appreciate where they're at? Because if you're talking policies that will impact on the life of someone in a space that they're not capable of accessing that information, I wonder what use that would be of to that person.
Yeah, I think that mostly people are looking at costs when it comes to these things. Technology is not cheap. It can be in the long term, but the infrastructure and setting up the tools for use are always problematic, or very investment or capital investment heavy.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I do know of quite a few governments and government agencies that talk the talk about wanting to bring younger people in. How do we bring them into the electoral processes so that they're exercising their votes? How do we encourage them to participate in all aspects of and deliver their civic duties, to be honest? It's got to do with, as I say, cost and also the willpower to do it.
Is it just the cost and will, or somewhere in the 4 points you raised between platform, empowerment, rewards, and strategy, the strategy part is probably missing? Do you find that governments are responsive and proactive about thinking into the future, especially where digital tools are concerned?
I doubt it. I think that most governments are looking at the censoring part of it, and so you will hear even Trump going on about wanting to shut this down, or putting a cap on this and shutting people out. So it's really about, maybe the strategies exist, but they're on paper. Now translating that into the real world, into this digital society in which we live, there is a missing link, and that's why I put it down to the will. And it's not just political will, because in Ghana, as soon as we say anything about will, we're thinking political will.
Yeah.
Even the managers of different entities, how have you structured your entity to bring in the millennials, the guys who live in the social media world, the guys who are in Twitter City, or in the Facebook Insta world, how are you positioned to bring them into the world where civic duties and civic responsibilities must be lived out? How do you empower them to live out their civic duties, including voting?
It's quite interesting. The concept of using digital tools, is now brands that you didn't expect. Brands that used to be very conservative. Some of your British banks, even some insurance companies that used to be, global giants who were very conservative, today have a very vibrant presence on social media and using digital tools. And they're curating their own news. Is that the new way? I mean, are we going to start seeing brands that grow to a certain point having their own mini newsrooms where they're churning out stories?
Well, I can't say no, it's never going to happen. But I would hazard to say, especially in our market, that's some ways off yet. I think that what is happening and what will happen is that they may stop using agencies in the way that they're using them, because they are setting up in-house teams that produce the information or the marketing campaigns and ads the way that they want, you know, in using software and tools that are now not just the preserve of those agencies, marketing agencies and publicists offices, but that, you know, in-house the tools are now here. If I bought an app, I don't know what app, but if I bought an app and that app has themes on it, like Envato or whatever, it has themes you can put in your...
Oh yeah, they're apps. I generate content by grabbing the raw content, throwing it into a template and rounding it up, and then you're done.
Exactly. So why would you need a publicist or a marketing agency? So I think that they will still need media houses, because we're still kind of at the forefront of distribution. Yes, social media's doing distribution, but especially in Ghana, it's still through closed groups, and we haven't found. People say WhatsApp, or people are thinking that WhatsApp is social media.
No, it's
WhatsApp
not.
is not social
Peer-to-peer.
media, and it's peer-to-peer. It's closed, and that's the biggest of our kind of where we are. Facebook
And WhatsApp.
Twitter not so much. And so since we're still in these closed groups, for the advertisers and marketing agencies and others to get through to us, they will still need channels such as yours.
But as we evolve, then they have to start looking at things differently.
I think so, but I'm sure that come that time, hopefully, we would have found ways in which to re-engage and to actually fit ourselves in that flow of information.
Fantastic stuff. Now, we're already in the back street, and I'd like to go back to your 4 points for, governments, including my one in Utopia, making sure that citizens are engaged, empowered. And so in building these platforms, what form do you think a platform like that ought to take? Yesterday at the CEO Summit, I remember hearing Mr. Ebenezer Chuma Asante saying that he felt the government ought to have a portal, like a citizens portal, where everything you need to know as a Ghanaian about Ghana and require by way of service, you go to this one location and you can find it all. So this is, of course, a front end with a very big back end, probably hosted by Nita or someone else like that. But is that the kind of thing you're talking about in terms of a platform?
That is number one, yes. But then because citizens are so distrusting, it might not be the only answer or the only solution. But that's a good start, where we have a portal that is a mashup of, you can interact with it, upload your own videos, get feedback. So it needs to be manned. You can put in things from your mobile app directly onto this portal. So it's got to be a mashup.
So very participatory.
Exactly.
Okay.
That allows. It's got an aggregator that can, and crawlers that can go on our Twitters and Facebooks and get innovative ideas that all feed into there, So it does have to have all those capabilities. Who manages it is a different question, because, as I said, if it's a government portal and we feel that it's the infrastructure is provided by NITA or the,
or government or
anyone,
we might be distrusting of it.
Exactly. So it might be useful to have a parallel board that actually helps to manage it.
Wow, that's interesting. So your platform is not a government administered platform, but it should be almost like a crowdsourced platform between, crowdsourced between government and the people. That we should be able to send things, then the aggregators should have a system that allows them to filter and make sure that these are factual, they're good enough and not divisive for our society, and then share it.
Yes.
Now, the empowerment bit and the rewards. Now, how do you empower people who quite often, and I'm talking more about the young people, how do you empower people who aren't supposed to be heard? Everything we do in this country, I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm older than you, you can't say this to me. There's just too many social protocols that young people have to go through, that they're beginning to just enjoy creating their own world.
Yeah.
And so that there's a detachment. How do you empower these same people to be participatory?
To be fair, a lot of that has changed in our society in Ghana. I find that when I was growing up,
You couldn't ask the questions your child asks of you now.
So a lot of that has changed.
Yeah.
I think that really your point about there being a subculture and a parallel world that these millennials and the generation after us have created is due to them wanting to shirk really from our generation, which in effect they feel is archaic and is not up to it, and so it's not that they feel excluded, they rather are the ones excluding us.
So they've created their own exclusive space.
Exactly.
And we need to beg our way into it.
And so that's why I said to you that I was using the word empower in a very broad sense, because we need to empower ourselves to get in that space and then to work from the inside outside. So get them to become more interested in what's happening in our world rather than only in what's happening in their parallel world that they've created.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do we get in? How we get in is by engagements. It's by making ourselves cool. I'm not saying that we need to start dressing the same way, but we need to start
Some
talking.
of us would love to do that, and some would definitely look ridiculous.
But we need to start talking
Yeah.
their language, and so that requires research and getting into their mindsets.
Okay. All right, so we've got 2 minutes to wrap this up before Komladum shows up with the news at 2, and then Lexis will follow with drive time. So let's get a little bit wee personal. You've done quite a number of things apart from writing for the magazine. You've also at some point been a music producer.
Oh my gosh, you just didn't do this, okay? So
I mean, what else do you do beyond Pen Plus Byte?
I think in the last few years, my focus has been on what my last point was, getting into the world of these young people.
Right.
And so I do a lot of mentoring. I do a lot of, just hanging out with young people in their spaces.
That explains why I don't see you very often.
and trying to drop my little bits, because what they don't want to hear are lectures or formal settings. Just drop my little observations and leave it at that. And I find that that's quite catalytic in getting them to behave in the ways that I would like to see them behave.
Wow, now that's very interesting. In fact, I wish I'd asked this question earlier, because the concept of the informal setting and engagement like that, are you finding that more effective than when you kind of talk at young people, say, hey, come here, I've lived a life, let me show you how it should be done?
Yeah. I think it works much more. We've got to consume music, and then try to show them our music. And so, you can have a playful contest around music. Okay, you're Sark going Rappadabba Day. I have somebody, Luther or James or whoever
From
way back going this, and then we can look at the lyrics and say, look, they're so similar. They're just doing it to a different melody, a different rhythm. And so those sorts of things where you're bridging the gap and finding shared experiences, that's what brings about the change in when you say, look, guys, this is all fun, but this is also real world stuff that we need to get into. If we can find these similarities, imagine how many more similarities we can find in the real world in terms of voting or whatever. And that's always the point.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Juliet Amoah, for spending time with us on the Executive Lounge today. Time's almost up. Here are my 5 takeouts from this conversation. Number 1, knowledge. Definitely has a lot of knowledge, which she must have spent time acquiring, which means that you must have passion to back your desire for that knowledge. The other thing is be future-minded. The things you do must affect people who are here now growing up, or people who will come after. We're all gone. And the 4th thing is that you must cultivate the power of observation. Without that, you won't be able to impart anything. And finally, just love being Ghanaian. Thank you so much. And we end the show. Unfortunately, not a lot of time to do this, but this is my song dedicated
coming out to the ghetto where the gunshot always a echo. You don't know? Hear the road boy crack.
It's Wuta's Big Dreams. I am Inshira Ado. As always, go forward, make rain. The news is up next with Komla Ado.
Sometimes I try to make them true.